Good evening. Welcome to the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. I'm your host, George Lewis. I've got a terrifically interesting guest tonight. A matter of fact, she's interesting enough. I have another show that I do locally here in Sarasota called Vortex Sarasota, and she was my guest for that show last week. And gosh, we had so much we wanted to talk about, we really didn't have much time. Before I introduce my guest tonight, let me give you a little idea about the Spiritual Broadcasting Network, what we're doing and why we're doing it, and also the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. You know, I want to talk first, I think, about the Spiritual But Not Religious Show. About 20 years ago, there started an exodus, really, from the mainstream churches. People were finding that they weren't really getting the experience of higher power, God, or what have you, that they were looking for in the church. And it started a movement where people really saw themselves as spiritual but not religious. You know, if you go back and you look at the mystics of the past, you'll find that the same qualities that define a mystic, finding God within, that noetic quality, that knowingness. You find that same thing with the spiritual and not religious group. And 20% of the United States population today claims to be spiritual but not religious, as opposed to Christian or Jewish or Buddhist or what have you. That's a lot of people. And because there's no community, there's no real church that these folks go to, they also don't have a voice. And part of what what we work at doing on this show is bring you the voices of that community, and they're diverse. Gosh, there's just, I mean, every kind of belief that you can possibly think about as far as how people see themselves when they're in that space. The Spiritual Broadcasting Company network, you know, it's just kind of a unique space and time right now where the media, meaning the 5 or 6 networks that bought the airwaves back in the 40s, really control what's being said, what we get fed, and you know, it's a real problem. So with the internet and television merging, it's just given an opportunity for anyone who wants to come in. You don't have to go through the licensing that they went through back in those days, and if you have good content, you have a real opportunity to bring a whole new viewpoint to spirituality, to everything, really. So it's kind of a unique place and time, and I'm working at taking advantage of that. We've got a lot of new shows coming on board. We have a new vice president coming on with us that is going to be helping us with promotions and putting new shows on. We'll be giving you that information as we move forward. My guest tonight is Toni Winninger. And this is a very unique lady. She's a channeler, and the way she channels in itself is very unique. I'm going to let her explain that to you in a moment. But I want to tell you, one of the things that impressed me most was her background, where she came from. She hails from Chicago, and she was a prosecuting attorney in the felony division in the Chicago area, which, you know, for channeling, they don't go together real well. So, but you know, like there's a real credibility factor that comes with coming from that kind of background, with that kind of a probing mind that really looks for facts, you know, to bring this to us. And I want to introduce you to Toni Winninger. Toni, welcome.
Thank you, George. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you back. You've been over here in the Sarasota Center for Light Church with Tom Newman, right? You've been giving...
Yes, I'm down here to do 2 weeks worth of individual sessions. I did last Sunday's talks. I'm going to be doing them this coming Sunday. I also have done a group channeling last Friday in the church. I'll be doing a group channeling Friday night, and I'm doing 3 seminars.
The Sarasota Center for Light here in Sarasota is on, what is it, Browning, I think? And
Browning and Tuttle.
Browning and Tuttle. Used to be the Shrine of the Master, for those of you who have been around for a while. What are the times that you'll be? Was it Friday night again?
Friday night at 7:30.
7:30. And the workshops you're doing?
The workshops I'm doing one Saturday. If people want to see, they can go on the website.
Okay.
Because the workshop on Saturday is, I think, from 1:30 to 4.
Okay. That's Sarasota Center of Light. Believe me, it's well worth, if you're here local, go take it out. And if you come on Friday night, I'll be there. And so introduce yourself. I think, let's talk about, about what brought you to this. You retired how long ago from
November 2002.
2002?
So just about 10 years ago.
About 10 years ago. What happened? I mean, when did you actually start doing the channeling? Were you still working as a prosecuting attorney, or is this something that happened for you later?
Well, there's a whole story.
Okay.
I started about a year and a half before I retired with a voice that, for the first time, I accepted something that wasn't physical.
Yes.
And it was a voice that said, "Why do you hate yourself?" And it got down to the fact, after I argued with it for a while.
Some truth in that, so it caught your attention.
Right.
Got you.
But I denied it.
Oh, for sure.
So I'm arguing with it. I'm walking my dog in the forest preserve. I'm arguing with this voice, and normally I wouldn't have paid any attention to it, but it seemed to be coming from not only outside me, but inside me as well.
Interesting.
So I gave it a little bit of credence, but of course, no, I don't, I don't hate myself. Why do you say that? And you know how when you're in an argument with somebody and somebody changes the question just slightly?
Uh-huh.
Well, they changed the question. What don't you like about yourself?
Oh, new viewpoint here.
So that was the breaking of the dam. Every frustration I'd ever had in my life, every unfulfilled dream came bubbling out. So as I thought about that, as I went home, I realized that there was much more out in the world and a part of me than I was aware of.
Absolutely.
At this time, I had been a prosecutor for over 25 years. I was very successful. I was a head prosecutor in a courtroom. I was a specialist in cross-examining expert witnesses.
I just had a hunch that was the case. Just in talking with you, I thought, well, yeah.
And I was no nonsense. I had no emotions. And I thought that I would go on a journey to see what was there.
Right.
So, as the universe always provides an opportunity, I'm at a health food store. They put a copy of the local metaphysical magazine into my bag. I get home, throw it on the counter, and it opens up to an advertisement for a spiritual encounter group.
Uh-huh.
And it was an 8-week series of classes.
And that must have been kind of like neon and jumped off the page at you?
Oh.
Because I'm sure there was a
It was
list of all
highlighted.
kinds of other, yeah. It's interesting how those,
It had a little beacon.
Absolutely.
Right onto it.
This is for me, right?
So this was so new to me that I called my best friend. And I said, "Rosaire, we got a class we got to go to."
Aha.
And we started going, and contrary to my normal self, I didn't say a word during the whole 8 weeks.
Really? Observed.
I just observed. Every concept was new to me. Life lessons, the journey of the soul, past life regressions, getting rid of past life issues that carry forward to this life.
Spiritual viruses.
Everything. I had been raised Catholic, and of course the Catholic Church doesn't believe in reincarnation. So I was just, way out there. What is all of this? My next step was to decide I needed to experience a past life regression.
Uh-huh.
That changed my life.
Yeah. It kind of puts pieces together you couldn't figure out any other way, doesn't it?
It did that, but it did something more.
Uh-huh.
During the time of the past life regression, and the therapist told me it would be 2.5 hours. We went for 3.5, almost 4 hours.
Wow.
We went back to 7 past lives. but more importantly, we spent time between lives.
That's interesting there.
And I felt the essence of my soul, the unconditional love. And for a person who had been without emotions for so many, many years, it was like a kid in a candy store, nirvana, bliss.
And being accused of not liking yourself, of hating, yeah.
So I first I didn't want to come back out of the hypnosis because it was so great.
I'll bet.
But I came back, and first thing I said when I came back was, how do I get to that feeling at will?
I want more.
I want more. Whatever I have to do, I want more. So he said, well, I have one question for you first. Do you love yourself?
Interesting. Oh, okay, universe. You got my attention for sure now, right?
Right. And he said, you can only love another, you can only go forth and be in connection with your soul to the extent you love yourself.
Isn't it interesting that when we're open, that this new information we get, another source will validate it?
Absolutely.
Like what just happened for you.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's very powerful.
So then I spent a year and a half of almost weekly sessions going in and following down my fears, my doubts about life, and any blockages.
So you did kind of an inventory.
I did an inventory. The first thing we did, I remember the first session, and he said, okay, see if you can feel your heart.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I can't. And he said, what do you see? And I said, I see this huge brick wall. It's got to be 20 feet high. I don't see any doors. And as I'm walking around it, it's impenetrable. So he said, that's where we've got to go.
We're going to go through the brick wall.
We're going to go through the brick wall.
He tell you how you were going to do that?
Well, he was an excellent therapist, so he left it up to me.
Right.
Now, most of these sessions were under hypnosis.
Yes.
So that my conscious mind was out of the way, my analytical mind.
Right. So you're in your right brain, and you left your left brain over off next door.
It's off hiding.
Right.
And with that, by going into your feelings, you find the key, because your unconscious mind says, well, of course, the reason you've got it there is you built it so you wouldn't feel the hurt.
Absolutely. You gotta have
When
the wall, right?
such and such happened and such happened. And it was a series of things, first from my own life, but then also from all of the work I had done.
Right.
Because I had had a number of jobs before I went to law school, and each one of them had a lot of trauma attached to them.
I was going to say, I brought trauma to you there.
Right.
That trauma, was it because of being female?
Mostly. I was a traveling sales representative in Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina in 1970.
Oh, jeez.
I was a Yankee, I was a single female, and I was the first female sales representative hired by the company.
You know, for those of our viewers who don't know what the 70s were like in Georgia, I was in Fort Myers, Florida in the 70s, 74. The sheriff's name was Snag Thompson, and he was a bigot. I mean, there's no other way to say it. They still had, although they weren't in use, they still had the colored and the white bathrooms and drinking fountains. We weren't that far from, what, 67? 60?
Right.
Yeah, we weren't that far away at all. So I can imagine being a woman. And I don't even know how you got the job, quite honestly.
Well, I got it because they combined two sales territories.
Uh-huh.
And the sales representatives that had represented the company in those places, one of them had had an affair with, I was selling to hospitals.
Right.
Had an affair with the chief pathologist's wife at Jacksonville Memorial Hospital.
Oh, that creates a problem.
And the other gentleman had taken 3 of the lab techs from hospitals in Charleston area. They had all gotten drunk, and they'd been in a bad accident and took them all out of business for 2 weeks.
Oh, jeez. So it was just an opportune kind of thing for you at that point.
Well, it was either they put a woman in those 2 sales territories, or the doors were slammed shut to them.
Well, what's interesting now is that, when you come past all of that and past being a prosecuting attorney, you are in a woman's field now. There are more women, at least that's our experience, in the spirituality thing, and channelers. Men are fewer by quite a bit. So things kind of flip for you on that aspect.
And I feel that's true within the spiritual field, because women are more able to go into their feelings.
Yeah, where it's all happening, isn't it?
It is. That's what my guides say all the time, is you've got to stop thinking and start feeling.
Right.
Because thinking is pulling things out of your head. And it's like a hard drive of a computer. How did the information get input? Either through your eyes or your ears. Where did that come from? Society.
So culturization, absolutely.
Right. So if you ask yourself, what do you think? You might just as well broadcast, okay, give me a poll of what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
I'm not involved in this.
And then if you're an approval seeker, you're in real trouble.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that goes on for sure. So, when did you first realize you could channel, and what was your experience there? I mean, how did that come about? Because I think, for me, there's a certain kind of surrender in order to allow that to come through. Mm-hmm. That, like you said, that left brain has to be out of the picture. What was your first experience with that?
Well, my first experience was talking to my own personal guides.
Right.
And that I could only do in the beginning through hypnosis, because it was the only way I could shut off my thinking mind.
Self-hypnosis, or did you need
Well, first hypnosis from my friend,
right.
to introduce me to my guides.
Right.
And then self-hypnosis to shut off my thinking mind
right.
while I talked to them. The state legislature passed a buyout so that I was going to be able to leave with the full pension on November 30th of 2002.
Ah, perfect.
I had some personal days and everything else coming, so I decided I would retire right after Thanksgiving. My guide suggested that I should go out and feel the energy in Sedona.
Oh, wow, okay.
And I had always thought about going to Sedona since I started on my spiritual trek. So I thought, hey, why not? I still wasn't too sure if the voices I was hearing and the messages I was getting was my guides.
Right.
So I tested them.
Uh-huh. And how'd you do that?
Well, they told me I should go to Sedona about the 10th of November.
Uh-huh.
And if I went to Sedona, I could go out before Thanksgiving and, in essence, retire while I was out in Sedona.
Uh-huh.
But you know how travel is on Thanksgiving.
Terrible.
You have to book sometimes 6 months in advance.
Right.
I had read an ad about a center in Sedona where it said they had a couple of condos. And I had read also that sometimes you fly into Phoenix, that Phoenix runs out of rental cars.
Right.
During big seasons. So it's the 10th of November. And I said, if you guys want me to go out there, and you think I should, I want a decent airfare. I don't want to have to pay premium prices. I want a nice rental car at a decent price. And I'd like to stay in one of these condos at this center.
Right.
36 hours, everything was in place.
Right there, and validated, and...
I said, there's got to be something here.
Sure, absolutely. And what was your experience in Sedona?
It was, again, mind-blowing. But that was where I learned to channel.
Right.
Was in Sedona.
So you took a course there, or you had a tutor?
No, I didn't. I had a tutor, a friend, a guide, the woman who headed the center, because I had talked to her.
Right.
And they had all kinds of things there. Everything from vortex tours to tarot readings, massages, channelings, you name it, they had it.
Right.
before I went out there, and I planned to stay there for 10 days, before I went out there, we planned what I was going to do every day.
Aha.
So she had everything lined up. And I get out there, and the very first night, she does a channeling for me. Now, prior to this time, George, my only experience with channeling or mediumship had been one psychic that I had gone to who was a friend of a friend.
Right. And that was before you...
Before I started on my spiritual path.
Got it.
And I wasn't real impressed with him.
Yes.
So I get out there, and Suzanne said, well, let me do a channeling for you this first night. She was a semi-trance channeler.
Aha.
And she got into her trance by toning.
Oh, that's interesting. When you say semi-trance.
Well, she was semi-aware of what was going on, and some of it she wasn't aware of.
I got it, okay. And toning is what?
Toning, well, she started,
Oh,
and all of these weird sounds.
Okay.
And I'm sitting there, what have I gotten myself into?
Oh, I bet, yeah. It's like, what is this?
You know, should I see if I can get back home real fast? And so I said, okay, I'm just going to go with it and see what happens. So she starts out and she said, I'm seeing a picture of 100 doors around you. And behind each and every one of those doors are more doors and more openings. And behind or inside of each one of those openings is some being, energy, or entity that says they want to work with you.
Wow.
And I looked at her like she was crazy.
Sure. Well, especially after a lead-in.
Right.
Yeah.
And I said, what in the blazes does that mean? And she said, I have no idea. And I,
Thanks very much.
again, what have I gotten myself into?
Right.
So the next morning she comes to set me up for the things I'm supposed to do. And she said, my guides, she used to do a morning meditation by walking out in the desert.
Right.
So she did her morning walk, and she came back, and she said, my guides said that we're supposed to throw out the schedule that we made, and your guides are going to tell us what you need.
Aha.
So I went into my semi-trance, because I still needed to do it at that time, and she asked, what should Toni do this day? Can't remember what I was supposed to do the first day, but they gave us a couple of things.
Right.
And of course the practitioners were available.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Even though they hadn't been lined up ahead of time.
Aha.
So the next day, she comes in, it's the same thing, what are you supposed to do today? So I named a couple of things. And then she said, all right, now I'm supposed to ask you what my day is going to be like. And I said, what do you mean? She said, your guides are going to tell us what my day is going to be like. And I'm thinking, I don't have that good of an imagination to be able to...
So you got pushed into this.
So I got pushed into it. And they told me how many people were coming in for tarot readings, how many were coming in for vortex tours, how many were coming in for massages. And then they told me that there was going to be a grandfather with his daughter and granddaughter that were going to come in late morning. They were going to ask about the price of a vortex tour, decide it was too expensive, leave, and come back about 2 o'clock in the afternoon with a total of 7 members of the family.
Oh, wow.
To take the tour.
And all of this occurred.
Suzanne came back that night and she said, Toni, you'll never guess. Everything happened exactly as your guide said it was going to. Well, of course, being still the skeptical prosecutor,
absolutely,
I'm thinking, boy, is she doing a good job of leading me on, telling me what I need to hear.
Right.
So we went through that procedure every day, and after about the second or third day, whenever I would have a session with somebody, it started out, they said, will you do a reading for me? I was so ignorant in the field. When the first person asked me if I could do a reading, I looked at her and I said, you mean you want me to read you a book?
Didn't know.
I had no idea what the terminology was.
Well, a whole new language.
It was a whole new language.
Sure.
A whole new concept for me.
Yeah.
So I did, then I started doing readings for every one of the practitioners after I had a session with them, because the word had gotten around.
Oh, wow, that's pretty interesting. Especially in Sedona. where they have, cream of the crop out there.
Well, and they had a bunch of,
Fly-ins.
well, they had a bunch of channelers at her center.
Right.
And here even one channeler asked me for a reading.
Is that right?
So it was...
So that was a real confidence builder then.
It was a real confidence builder.
Yeah.
And it was...
And in this field, you really need as much confidence building as you can get.
Well, I think you need validation.
Exactly.
More than anything else.
Right. That to me is kind of like...
Yeah, it's similar to the same thing.
Right.
So then I came home after 10 days. I came back to Chicago. The energy is so much thicker in Chicago.
Yeah, it's a much finer ether out there, isn't it?
The density of the people alone felt overpowering. So I tried channeling.
Right.
And I also, was very happy with my, newfound skills and everything else.
Sure.
And I had a little trouble keeping my conscious mind out of it. So it was turning out to be a total disaster. So I decided, well, that was nice, but I had already been certified as a hypnotherapist and a Reiki master teacher. I'll do that when I retire. I'd already rented an office for it.
Right.
So hang up the channeling. It just isn't going to work here.
I'm done. It isn't working. I'd have to move to Sedona.
So what do my guides get? They get Suzanne, the one who had led me out in Sedona, to call me on the phone. She started having some personal problems. She didn't dare go to anybody in Sedona.
Oh, yeah.
Because everybody
Travels
talks
around,
to everybody else.
Yeah.
So she started calling up to get me to channel for her over the phone.
Oh, very cool. So you've just been kind of led into this whole process.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah. And I can tell by the look in your eyes that it brought you to a good destination.
Well, it did. And it brought me to a realization that one of my agreements before I came down here to planet Earth was that after I completed the majority of my life lessons, I was going to go into service.
Right.
And the service was I was going to be get this, mouthpiece.
Could be a mouthpiece, huh?
For the spirits.
You come out of the right place of the world, Chicago, to be a mouthpiece, for sure.
And the legal profession.
Yeah, absolutely, huh? That's great. So, well, you've turned out to be a pretty good mouthpiece. You know what? Let's do this. We got a lot more to talk about, and I know we'll never get there. But I'm sure that our audience, our viewers, are kind of anxious to see what you do.
Okay.
So how shall we do that? Shall I ask you a question? You want to just, how would you like to see it happen?
Well, first let me explain to
Please do.
The audience
right.
that I'm not probably what you've seen before as far as a channel or a medium or a psychic goes. What I do is I now can shut off my conscious stream of thought. It's gone most of the time.
Right.
So I don't have to do self-hypnosis or anything else. I am not a trance channeler. In other words, I don't give my body up to somebody else to come in. So my voice doesn't change. I don't have any facial change or anything like that.
You still stay Toni the way we see Toni.
I still stay Toni in a conversational voice. And what happens is I just clear my mind and become a conduit. Anybody asks me a question or wants to know something about a particular issue, and the answers come in. And I've gotten to the extent through the last probably 7-8 years that I'm like a simultaneous translator. In the beginning, they would say something into my head and I would have to think a minute and then repeat it. But now it comes out simultaneously.
So you moved yourself out of the way.
I moved myself totally out of the way.
And, gosh, what I was going to ask you slipped away, so we'll go ahead.
Okay. So what I do is, it may seem like it's me that's talking, and it will be my voice, but the answers that are coming through are the guides.
Right.
The group that I work with is huge. I have my 3 primary guides. They're always around. But I also have guides that are experts in medical things, financial things, some in politics, but they've sort of disappeared lately. World events.
Good time for them to disappear and what we got going on.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, what they say is when there becomes too many variables to deal with, it's not worth trying.
Makes sense.
So they just kind of disappear.
Oh, I know the question I was going to ask you. Do you get a visual along with the auditory part of it?
What I do is the voices come through. I will get the way I visualize. I don't visualize in pictures, but I visualize in impressions.
Okay.
That I know what's there. I can describe them to you, but I can't see them as pictures.
Gotcha.
And the third thing is they will give me feelings. Like if somebody asks about, do a medical scan on me and tell me, if you've got a bum knee, my knee will hurt.
Uh-huh.
If you ask about a person, I'll get a feeling of what their personality is like, whether they're jovial, whether they're depressed, whether they're hiding things. And that's really neat, getting the feelings from the people I'm doing the reading on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just more validation.
Right. And I never know what's going to happen.
If you did, then your mind would be in it.
Then I would be involved in it. People ask, can I channel for myself? And the answer is
That was going to
no.
be one of my questions.
I cannot. Because in order to channel for myself, I have to be involved, at least in asking the question.
Right.
Once in a while, when there's something I really want to know, what I'll do is I'll write the questions out, give them to my partner that I write my books with, and I'll say, Peter, sometime when I'm in the midst of channeling something else, throw in these questions.
Ask these, would you please? Well, that makes really good sense to me, Toni, because I did quite a bit of automatic writing. Mm-hmm. And I went back to it, and I really found myself in a lot, and the questions I was asking were quite self-centered anyhow, so I really hear what you're saying. All right, well, does that pretty well sum it up?
That pretty well sums it up. And the one thing I do is that before I begin a session, I ask the archangels, the ascended masters, and all beings of the light to be present with us here.
Okay.
And to allow in only energies, entities, and beings who will come forth for the highest and greatest good. We
had a fellow on the show, Wayne Brewer, wasn't it, Tom?
Yes.
Wayne Brewer had written a book about, exactly that, and he said that when I come on a show, you'll find that trouble happens, and he did too, and we had it, and it was like, I forget the name of his book, but that's what he was, like trying to help people to get rid of all of this part of it. Okay, well, great. And have you done that with your?
Yes, I have. I just did.
I thought you were doing it while we were going through it. The question I would ask is, there's I believe a movement, and maybe it's already occurred, a shift in consciousness, where we go from, that dark side of ourselves to where it's more dominant, the greed, the ego, and all, false ego and all that, to a lighter side and to a whole different world. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, the first thing that has to be understood is that this planet Earth is unique. It was constructed so that Source who is perfect, omnipotent, all-powerful, all-creative, could understand a little bit more about its perfection.
About itself.
About itself. So it broke off pieces of itself, which we call souls. And those souls came down to experience what Source was not. The only way to do that was to have a classroom that had negative and positive.
Mm-hmm. Polarity.
That classroom is planet Earth. It is the only one in existence, the only place in existence that has the duality. There is an equal amount of negative and positive energy. But that does not mean each soul has around it at any one time an equal amount of positive and negative. Each soul has total freedom of choice to choose whether to be positive or negative. The lessons that came down with each soul are presented in a negative format because that is the opposite of the perfection that they have at home when they are in their energetic form of unconditional love.
So we come here looking for trouble.
We come here to look for trouble. And the way we learn the lesson is to understand what the trouble is and make the choice to learn not to have to experience it again. On the planet right now, it is going through a shift in that we are reaching the end of a 26,000 plus year cycle
Right.
of the rotation of planets throughout the Milky Way galaxy. And at this point, at the end of the 26,000 year cycle, all of the planets are going to be in a straight line across the Milky Way galaxy. As this has been coming into fruition, and it will be completed on December 21st, 22nd of 2012, your current year, it has allowed energies to go between the dimensions, the physical and the non-physical dimension, without the static, without the interference that was caused by the planets when they were in random orbits. So that right now, people who choose, people who have worked through their lessons, people who are getting rid of the judgment of the ego and going into the evaluation of the soul, are able to feel the draw of the positive energy. They are becoming what you call enlightened,
Right.
or awake. And those people are gathering together energy, which leaves the negativity that would normally be around them to go to other places. That is why on your planet at this time, there are more armed conflicts than at any time in history.
Well, because of the concentration of that.
Because of the concentration of negativity
Interesting.
in other places on the earth. So it has not changed the balance of negative and positive on your planet, just the positioning of the negative and the positive.
So we kind of like, you're on channel 7 or you're on channel 12 and they just kind of don't meet.
Correct.
Kind of different vibrations, a different frequency.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So we can look forward to more of the same, but everything different, depending on your own vibration. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, it's the choice of each soul
Right.
where they want to be. But once they have experienced returning to their essence, having a taste of their essence, of that unconditional love, where there is no negativity whatsoever, they normally do not choose.
Oh, once you've had a taste of peace of mind and contentment, it's forget it. This is what I was looking for.
To go back and experience any negativity.
How does the collective consciousness affect all of that?
Well, the collective consciousness is not as pervasive as Carl Jung talked
It's
about.
not as powerful as Jung.
Well, it is. There is like a negative collective conscious and a positive collective conscious.
Sure.
So that the power of the positive collective consciousness can affect anything that is energy, and everything is ever energy. So in the particular situation on the planet right now, some of the forces of these planets coming into alignment has caused the Earth to tilt on its axis. And it has at one time tilted up to 36 degrees.
Really?
With the possibility of it shifting and the poles being reversed. Now, geologically, your scientists have proven that this has occurred at least 4 times
Yes.
in the history of the planet. Were that to be an occurrence on this lifetime, It interferes with all the electrical activity on the planet, which would be very detrimental to your electrical impulses in your heads.
Oh, right. Okay.
A lot of your light workers, being aware of this, have sent energy to the planet to help shift it back slightly. And they have been successful.
Bringing a balance.
And bringing it back. So those who have been a part of groups sending energy to Gaia or planet Earth have been instrumental in doing this. Also, there are groups that send other bursts of positive energy to help create peace where the Earth is to be torn apart, with volcanoes, earthquakes, things of that nature.
What's the reason that, you know, these beings or whatever are sending that kind of light? I mean, what makes Earth so important among the billions of planets and everything? You mentioned earlier that we're the only one.
We're the only one that has a negative and positive duality.
Really?
On it.
Uh-huh.
There are inhabitants on other planets, but those planets all have a theme, like theme parks.
Okay.
Somebody wants to go to a place where they learn all about the ability of the physical body to be perfected. Or they want to study the communications ability of music. Or they want to discuss philosophy as it is based in a duality. Even though they haven't experienced the duality on that planet,
right.
They can discuss it because most of them have been on Earth at least once.
Right.
Or it may be a place where they just want to experience romantic love. Not all of the other planets do the beings look like humans.
Right.
There are some places where they don't even have bodies. They just are in their energetic state.
Are we talking about planets at that point or dimensions or both?
Both. Now, the dimensions are where you go from physical to non-physical. The planets is where you have physicalnesses, physicalities, but they are different.
Okay.
Now, the souls that are on other planets in other physicalities, they are comparable to souls that are incarnate in physical bodies on planet Earth. So they are not spirits. They are having a physical experience on another planet.
Interesting. That, how about if we move from this, you know, you've written, what, is it 8 books or 6?
Written 7 large books and 4 pamphlets.
Yeah, and you'll find those on Toni's website. What is it? What's
Masters of the Spirit World.
mastersofthespiritworld.com. I really recommend you take a spin over to her website. There's a lot of interesting things there. And she's really prolific with the writing. One of the things, and I'd like to kind of take us there now, you wrote a book talking with, a matter of fact, you wrote one for males and females, right? Or is it all the same book?
No, there's 3 books. We call it the trilogy.
Okay.
Now this is me.
You're back. Okay.
I'm not channeling.
Good.
I can go in and out. If you ask a question and you need the masters,
Well, you're
they'll be
conscious
back.
and you're yeah. I'm
really,
totally
aware of everything they say and everything they do.
Right.
And they were the actual authors of these books, so to speak.
I understand.
We started out with talking with leaders of the past. And this was all leaders born in the 19th century that had various impacts on the world. There were military leaders, religious leaders, scientists, philosophers, and women who were ahead of their time.
Right. Well, yeah, I hear that.
And in each one of those, my partner, Peter, he went out and he selected the questions of things that he thought people would want to know from these people. It started out with his curiosity to ask Carl Jung some questions about a book that he had just read about Carl Jung.
Right.
and he asked me if I could channel Carl Jung. And I told him I've never done anything like that before, but I said, hold on a minute. And I checked in with my sort of organizer and everything else is Archangel Michael.
Right.
He's my main man.
Right.
So I got Michael on the line and I said, go ask the soul that was Carl Jung, one, if he's still at home, and secondarily, if he'd like to answer Peter's questions. And Michael came back instantly. Carl would love to.
Absolutely. Well, yeah.
So it was some 6-8 weeks before we got together, but Peter came in with 5 typed pages of questions.
Wow.
And he just sat there and asked Carl about his different theories, about his different changes in his theories that he now has, that he's
Now that he has a different
now that
viewpoint.
he has a different viewpoint from what he had when he was on Earth.
Did he talk at all about the Gnostic Jung?
No.
I wonder, he was quite a Gnostic here in this lifetime.
Yeah, he just questions that he had, and we tape recorded it, and I thought that was all there was going to be. So Peter rushes home to transcribe it,
Right.
and he calls me up. And he says, "We got to write a book." And he said, "I think we should talk to leaders. I'd like to talk to Churchill and William James, Gandhi, Darwin, Einstein, Dwight Moody, Carnegie, Oh, and why not Churchill and Hitler?
Do them all.
Do them all." So, we did a lot of research. We first asked through Michael if these people were available. Because if a soul has come back into a body, reincarnated, they're not available for us to talk to them.
Gotcha.
In their prior persona. So we set up interviews, in each week. Peter and I were a little uncertain about talking to Hitler.
Yeah, I suspect the energy there has got to be a little...
Well, it wasn't so much the energy, but, this was our first book.
Aha.
And we had hoped that it would, present us to the world, in what we're doing.
Did you worry a bit about making that connection?
No, I had no qualms about
have,
making that connection.
Once you hook into that energy, does it, does it flow through?
Oh, yes.
So
Yes.
you felt it.
Yeah. Oh, I felt it big time. It was cool doing some of these people because I felt the energies as it came through with what their primary purpose was in that particular life. And when we did the men's and the women's book, I loved the Ella Fitzgerald.
Aha.
Because it turns out that she was one of the first souls that was split off from Source. And she was always involved in communication. And she did most of it through music.
Oh, really?
During the entire interview, George, I was listening to this beautiful music.
Oh, wow.
In the background. Of course, Peter couldn't hear any of it. I'm sitting there just floating.
Sure.
In this
euphoric.
In this world that was unbelievable. When we did Yehudi Menuhin, there was violin music during the entire interview.
So you had strings and answers.
Strings and answers.
That's a nice deal there. You mentioned William James. What was his books, Varieties of Spiritual or Religious Experience.
Yes.
Very powerful book, all about mysticism, and he had never really experienced mysticism himself.
No.
And in your conversation with him, what took place there? What was the main thing that you?
Well, the interesting thing was that Peter is British.
Uh-huh.
And he at one time at a rally, because Peter was part of the peace movement and William James was part of the peace movement, had actually met William James.
Oh, really? Aha.
Peter also had been a minister in the UK.
Oh, he was? Okay.
So he himself has written several religious books before we started together on this path. So he had a lot of very technical religious questions.
I bet.
to ask of William James. Interestingly enough, whenever we were going to interview anybody, I didn't read a thing about them.
Right.
I didn't do any research. I wanted to be as blank and unfront-loaded, as they say, as possible.
Right.
And while I knew these names of a lot of the people we interviewed, I had never studied them or anything else.
Sure.
So when the answers were coming through, they didn't mean anything to me.
Right.
Because it was beyond my personal study or information.
But they must have impacted Peter.
Oh, Peter was just, he was dancing through the whole thing, I think.
Well, I'm sure he was. To stay with you for, 7 books, something had to have been happening for Peter in his experience with that whole thing. What happened with Hitler? What was that like?
Well, the week before we were going to interview Hitler, at the end of the previous interview, and I can't even remember who it was, because we didn't do them in the order they showed up in the book. We just did them whenever Peter had the research done, and we had made arrangements with my guides to have them available for the next week. So Michael said, Peter, Toni, we want to tell you something. This interview with Hitler is going to be different than any other interview you've done. And at this point, Peter and I almost weren't going to do the Hitler interview.
I can imagine there was some reluctance.
Because we were afraid of what the reaction was going to be.
Right.
So the guides never tell you what to do, but they advise you. So, there's Michael. He says, well, look at guys, this is going to be a fun interview. It's going to be very informative. And you have freedom of choice whether to include it in the book or not. But it's something you really don't want to miss.
That's an interesting word to use with Hitler. It's going to be a fun interview.
So then he's giving me this, uptake. It's going to be a dual interview.
A duel?
A dual interview. You are going to interview, in all the other interviews, we interviewed the soul.
Okay.
Back home with, all of the unconditional love and everything else. He said, this interview, you are first going to interview the persona that was Hitler. Then you are going to interview the soul.
That's a whole interesting concept, just in the fact that, when you think about Hitler being back in unconditional love, for some people that would be just, that'd be traumatic. The whole idea is traumatic.
I know. And that was one of the reasons why we were very hesitant to do the interview.
Right.
And we were, even after we did the interview, we thought long and hard before we put it in the book.
So when you think about all this on that kind of basis, how important is all this here? What's it really mean to us? If we're, if we're here, are we just down here, like going to the movie, and we go back and we're going to experience unconditional love? Is there a purpose here?
Well, I think that we covered that in 2 of our books.
It only took 2 books was all.
Well, Exploring Reincarnation, which goes through the whole journey of the soul. And it also has essays talking about hot button issues, abortion,
Okay.
homosexuality,
Okay.
suicide. And then the second book that it is very impactful is The Life Lessons, Our Purpose for Being Human. That was our latest book that we just brought out.
Right. That's the one you just brought me, right?
Right, that's the one I gifted you with the other day.
Right.
That tells why we do what we do.
Okay. I knew I wanted to read that book, so and I will this week. You're doing a workshop called Who You Really Are? Who are you really?
I didn't think I was doing that this time. I think I did that last time. I know.
Where I got that was from the last time.
The last time. That was one I did last time when I was here. I did one last night on visualizing your way to success. And in a couple of days, I'm doing one on life lessons, why bad things happen to good people.
There's quite a combination of things right there.
Right.
So, on the workshop you did on Who Am I Really?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a synopsis?
It's talking about your essence, the fact that you are an energetic part of Creator, of Source, and that after you were broken off from Source, you chose to come down to be part of examining what perfection means by finding out what perfection isn't.
Isn't. You would need to experience the opposite. Well, in all of your major religions, they tell us that. They tell, Jesus, I said ye are gods.
Mm-hmm.
Not the God, but gods. Mm-hmm. So we tend to not pay a lot of attention to some of these things.
Well, we have to go through a period of accepting the possibility first.
Absolutely. And then the responsibility.
And the responsibility. But first off, with modern society doesn't believe in anything non-physical.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And they'll tell you if you can't prove it. I was there. The attorney, if I couldn't pick something up and show it to you, it did me no good.
Right.
So society says, if you can't prove to me that it exists, I'm not going to believe you or have anything to do with it. So the response that the guys have given me to give back to them is, prove to me love.
Really? Yeah. Good luck there, right? Strictly a feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Strictly a feeling. Well, if it weren't for, I used to spend and make my decisions with my head. Like you were talking, I found out that my brain really is nothing but a warm, fuzzy spreadsheet. It does a lot of what ifs, But the real direction I get comes right here in my solar plexus, mm-hmm. right in my emotional being. And without that, I'm kind of lost, kind of lost. We got a couple 3 minutes left. Anything you want to leave our audience with?
Well, just that, as you say, this is fuzzy. And as the masters say, it's input from the outside. Go with your feelings. When you ask your feelings, whether it's your heart feelings or your intuition feelings,
right.
What you are asking is get out of what has come in that society has said and give me input from who I am, from what I am, from all of the experiences I've had. Tap into my unconscious, into the higher self, the soul, and let me benefit from that information and use that to decide where I'm going to go. Let me take my power back.
Oh boy, and use it rightly.
And use it rightly. Let me put society in its place, that they're here, they're there. I have to be responsible for myself, and I'm going to do it in such a way that I feel it and grow in the knowledge as I go along. My whole purpose at this time is to help people to find out who they are,
right.
To help people find about the journey of the soul from the point of origin through incarnation and everything that we're going to do from here, why they have the life lessons.
And finding out they're larger than what they see. They see.
That they are much larger
Huge,
than what they
isn't
see.
it? Toni, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming back a second time. We really finally got to talk about some of the meat of what you do. It was great. Listen, I've got, before I leave, Friday night around 7:30 at the Sarasota Center of Light, Browning and Tuttle, and you can go there. Toni has a group channeling, which has got to be very interesting. I've never been to a group channeling. I'm definitely going to be there. Come and give it a try. Next week, I'll be back. I'll have a great guest. In the meantime, don't forget to accentuate the positive and have a fantastic week.